Okay, so I think everybody's here. So you're all very welcome. This is the first in a series of 3 webinars with the School of History. So thank you all for joining us. Hope you stay with us right through. We're here with History until 3 p.m. So do stay keyed in on this link. We're going to kickstart. The first session is with Associate Professor Lindsey Earner-Byrne and Dr Conor Mulvagh. We're going to be talking to you about Irish history and about public history in particular. We're also very lucky to be joined by recent graduate Sabrina D'Angelo, who will be speaking to you later. So we're going to kick off, if that's okay, with Lindsey. Then Lindsey is going to give you the overview to Irish history. And then Conor will come in and talk to you about public history. And at that stage, we'll bring Sabrina in, who will talk to you about her experience on the course. Thank you again for joining us. You're all very welcome. I would like to encourage you to, any questions that you have, send them in on the chat or the Q&A function. We really want to hear from you where you are. We want to hear all your questions. But most importantly, we just wanted to give you a quick update on matters COVID related. So for those of you who aren't aware, the first day of term will be the 21st of September. It is very likely to be blended learning, so a mix of face-to-face and online teaching. And details of that are going to be finalised over the coming weeks and possibly months. A lot will depend on the 1 metre, 2 metre restrictions and social distancing and all of those things. So we just encourage you to keep in touch with us, and we'll keep in touch with you. And without further ado, I will hand you over to Lindsey Earner-Byrne. Lindsey.
I thought what I'd do is kind of just briefly introduce you to the offerings that the school has. Some of them you'll know, and then focus in particularly on modern Irish history, the scholarships that are available, which might be of interest to people. And then we've chosen public history as a sort of one to go really in depth with, because it's been very popular and very successful in the last few years. So Conor is kindly here to give you kind of really detailed description of that program, and then we have a graduate as well, which is super. Okay, so you probably know most of us if you have done your BA degree with us, and in particular if you've done history, but there we are, colourful motley crew on the steps there outside the Tierney building, opposite the Newman building, which we miss so much. Did we ever think we would say that? But not being on campus is something I think that we are all really finding very challenging, and hopefully at least part of next year we'll be back there in the sunshine. I just want to give you an overview of some of the programs that will be dealt with later between 2 and 3 in a similar session for any of you that would like to register to that and come in and see those sessions as well. We have quite a strong development in European history. You can see there the 2 programs, the MA in European history, which is a 2-year program, and MA International Studies as well, which is also a 2-year program, and that's split between various European destinations. And so if that's of interest to some of you, particularly those of you with a language or who would like to develop a language, you might want to tune in later. And then global histories are kind of our newest endeavour in a sense, and that's also very well served by some really great academics in the school, and those academics will be talking to you later. So anybody who's interested in that, please do sign into those sessions. I have the 2 emails there for you to contact people if for any reason you can't make those sessions, and you could email either of those 2 people there, William Mulligan or Mark Jones, or indeed myself, and I can refer you on. One of the programs that really distinguishes the school, I'm just going to mention briefly, the really important thing is the contact name there, Elizabeth Mullins. This is the MA in Archives and Record Management. And this is really quite something we're really very proud of in the school, because it is one of the only programs that actually gives you kind of an accredited course in this subject. It's extremely popular and really very well regarded. And if anybody is interested in that and developing into, you know, archive management or into that curatorial heritage field, you might be interested in getting in touch with Elizabeth Mullins, and she'll give you all the information there. I've just given you a little smattering of archives from my own little digital collection, but it does also bring home to you that that's what you'll be doing no matter which of the programs that you decide to take with us, and that is getting your hands dirty, hopefully in the archives among the dust and the secrets that have yet to be discovered. But also, given the situation that we're in at the moment, the school has been putting together a fairly detailed list of archives that have been digitized. And so those of you that will not be able to attend campus, one of the things we're going to try and do is support you to find a thesis topic that you can actually do with some of the digital primary source material, which there's so much more than there used to be. So that's one of the things that we're going to do to try and help with the current situation. We also have a very well reputed MA in welfare and medicine, and that is run by Dr. Cox. It's also one of the only such programs on the island and is very popular as well. We get a mix of students for that. Students who are interested in British, European and Irish history will choose that. And some people who do the Modern Irish MA might actually take an elective from that as well, and vice versa. So it covers a wide range of issues to do with, and how relevant in relation to the current climate, to do with public health and how that has influenced things like the way the state behaves, our notions of democracy. And of course, we're really, really living through that at the moment. And so that's something that might interest people, quite particularly because of the current context. And the only other one I want to briefly mention before I go into Modern Irish History is the MA in Medieval Studies. Again, this is it's a really good program. It's run over 2 years. And because it branches out past history as well. And again, this is dealing with history, classics, English, languages and music. So you've got a whole array of all those sort of cultural source material if that's where your interest lies. And again, you would also produce a dissertation at the end of that program. That program is particularly small group and might be of interest to those of you with a fascination in all things medieval. I think the image is also really beautiful, which Michael Staunton supplied to me for this PowerPoint, and Michael Staunton is your contact person for that program. So if you have an interest in that, you might get in touch with Michael specifically and talk to him about it. But again, you can always email me as well. Just to come to the program that I'm involved with, and that is the MA in Irish History. And of course, because they gave me free run on the PowerPoint, I had to get some women in there. And the image that you're looking at is 3 Cumann na Món members, May Burke on the left, Ethna Coyle, and Linda Cairns from the centre to the right. I think it's a super image, right? Because it immediately jars. You're not used to seeing images of women with weapons, but also they're very casual in their stance and they're smiling. And it shows you the degree to which involvement in the revolutionary period was also a social activity and in which really firm friendships were formed, and in some cases marriages came out of it. So that's my own particular interest, will be more the social and cultural aspect of conflict in modern Ireland. But we also have experts that really deal in terms of revolutionary history as well. For the MA in Modern Irish History, we focus particularly on social and cultural history and gender history. And it's something that we have a really deep expertise in the school on. And usually you're talking about groups of between 6 and 8 students in the program, so you get a lot of individual attention. And what we really focused on is giving you the confidence to bring your own voice to history. So you have spent your years as an undergraduate reading other historians' work, and now is your opportunity to become a historian yourself, to contribute to the writing of history. But also as staff, what we do is we share our own writing and our own struggle to become better historians, but the ways in which we too have sort of changed and developed over the course of our careers in order to kind of bring you into the experience of becoming a historian. We are very interested though in the ways in which what we teach you, in the ways we try and help you to work on skills like analysis, but also the ways in which you can look at quite a significant amount of information and distill that information into core points. We think that they will serve you wherever you go after your time with us. And it's the array of things that people have done after doing the MA in Irish History, or indeed any of our MA programs, is really extraordinary. And some people sometimes say to me at career fairs, what can I do? What job can I do with an MA in History? And I'm like, what job can you not do with an MA in History? And I think that's really, really true. My experience also is with our graduates who've gone out into the world, and they often get feedback from employers, and we do as well, that what employers are really interested in is the way in which our students can really actively, critically think and engage and provide context across a wide array of issues. And that's really quite unique to the skills that we give in humanities in general, but in history in particular. And I think everybody would agree that the world is short on that at the moment. So you will graduate with pretty valuable skills that help you to deal with a world where you're being bombarded with issues like fake news, and where there's a sense that democracy is being undermined by the very fact that we can't really depend on stable facts in the same ways we used to be able to, that we need to be much more discerning when engaging with that world. And we are influenced in our teaching with all of that, and we will engage in discussions about the way in which contemporary and the environment is also influencing the way history is written. Just to give you very briefly on the structure, and it's kind of mechanical in a sense, but it's important to know. The program is overall a 90 credit program. And of that, you've got 40 credits in which you do modules of content material. And I'll give you an example of some of those in a moment. But the thing that we really stress and pride ourselves, and I think the thing that most staff really value, and the thing that we really over the years have realized our students get most out of is the 50 credit research dissertation, where we give you an awful lot of space and time and support to develop your own historical project, to carry it from that initial idea then through to, well, what sort of source material do you need in order to try and answer your research questions, and then shaping that into a coherent piece of work. And quite a few of our students have gone on to publish extracts or sections from their thesis. And I think all of them have found it a really fulfilling thing to do, feel incredibly proud upon completion of that. In terms of the 40 credits, I've just given you a brief selection there of the kind of modules that you can do if you take the MA in Modern Irish History. You get a sense there of gender in Modern Irish History is one that I do. Debates in Irish History is just sort of looking back at the issues that have caused controversy, or ways in which over a period of time we've come to reconsider certain events. And then De Valera's Ireland, of course, in a sense speaks for itself. It's a review of 20th century Ireland. But you can see that we also have things like Women in War, where you're looking at Ireland and Britain. And with things like popular culture, I know that Professor Rouse draws really heavily on European literature and on comparative literature. So we really do encourage you to consider Ireland, I suppose, in a global context as well, and to be kind of really bold with the comparisons that you might, we don't inhibit you in any way in that sense. And then you can see there's medicine and marginalised in Modern Ireland, which is of course really topical, dealing with things like mental health and the way in which the history of that has changed over the 20th and the 21st century. Just briefly, in terms of jobs and careers, this is just a sample of some of the things that we know graduates have gone into. Diplomacy and government. We had quite a few speechwriters, and one of the ways in which I really saw the influence of that was during the repeal referendum, when the Minister for Health stood up in the Dáil and he began his speech about Anne Lovett, a case of an unmarried mother in the early 1980s in Ireland. And the whole speech was really rooted in a very deep understanding of Irish social history, and I suspect some of our graduates were behind that speech. So we can go very far up into the echelons of government. With a lot of people also who develop policy, public policy and civil service. I know, in fact, of one person that is really involved in public policy in Northern Ireland, in particular with welfare, who's a graduate of ours. And of course, marketing and communication, because that's what we do, that's what we spend our time doing. How do you interpret material, and how do you then distill that information and communicate it to a wide audience, and so on. In terms of money and affordability and so on, there are a few things that we can offer. One in particular is new this year, which is a scholarship the school is going to award anybody who has graduated from a BA with us with a first class. Will get €1,000 remission from fees at source, which means that you'll pay 1,000 less for your MA fees. And that's a way of recognising the work that you've done with us so far. And of course, trying to encourage you to continue to work with us, which is what we would really like. We also have two scholarships of slightly higher value. One is the prestigious Margaret McCurtain Scholarship, named after one of the lecturers from the school, Margaret McCurtain, who really is the mother of women's history in Ireland, if you like. And that's to the value of €4,500. I've given a link there, but if you put Margaret McCurtain Scholarship into your Google, you'll find it. And if you don't, email me and I'll give you a lowdown. Can also help you with the application process. And then finally, the Kevin B. Nolan Scholarship there, which is open to those of you who are interested in both Irish and modern European history, for €5,500, which is a really nice contribution to the cost of an MA. And again, if you stick that into your search engine, you should find it. But if you don't, just come and talk to me about it, and I'll help you through the process as well. Just to wrap up, and by way of handing over to Conor, I'm just highlighting one of the resources that we're really proud of in the school, which is the History Hub, which is a really dynamic example of how we integrate our philosophy of teaching history and our students' work. So we often encourage students not just to engage with this resource, but also to contribute to it. And one of our graduates, you can see on the next page here, Hayley Kilgannon, who worked with Conor Mulvagh on the Public History MA between 2017 and 18, actually put up some of her research, and so did many others actually from that program, put up their research onto the History Hub. So after this session, if you want to get an idea of what some of our students have done, just play around on the History Hub. It's a really super resource, and know that you have an opportunity yourself to disseminate some of the research you do on that hub if you come to work with us. So I think it's a really good moment to hand over to Conor, because it's kind of an example of how the program that Conor in particular and Paul Rouse have put together in public history has sort of really breathed fresh air into the history and given us a real dynamic public facing profile. So Conor, I'll hand over to you.
So this program originated in 2017, and it addressed, I suppose, two things. First of all, the school's outstanding specialization in disseminating history. So members of the school, from myself and Lindsey, right the way through, from the Irish historians to the European historians to the medievalists to the early modernists, have been to the forefront in bringing history to new publics. And that doesn't just mean bringing it to the public through national broadcasting and things like that, but identifying other publics, other groups of people who may not have engaged with their own histories or with histories in the past, and bringing that to new audiences. So that, coupled with our, I suppose, expertise in actually delivering this, from setting up HistoryHub.ie in 2013, and I was one of the early editors of that, Paul Rouse founded it, right the way through to our specialisation in the decacentenaries. These were all things that led into the creation of the MA in Public History. Basically, just to go through the structure of it first, what a lot of people ask me when they ask about MAs is, what are we actually doing on a day-to-day basis? So I've constructed this just to give you a sense. As Lindsey explained, there's 90 credits in the course. 50 of them are on your dissertation. Your dissertation really starts, maybe not from day one, but certainly from week one. And it's a good thing to start thinking about now during the summer. Think about what you want to write your dissertation on. And what we always say is bridge your topic to expertise within the school. So go through the staff profiles, find someone who's an expert in that topic, and use that to bridge what you're interested in yourself with their expertise. And then you start to really build that up. So all the time in the background, you're researching and writing your dissertation. That involves engaging with archives, be that in person or digitally. It means reading secondary literature. It means essentially becoming an expert on that topic. And just like Lindsey said, some of our students have gone on to publish their work. One of my students who did his MA with me several years ago, Fergus O'Farrell, he published his MA thesis in an augmented form as the life of Carl Brugha in the UCD Press Life and Time series in Carl Brugha. So he did his MA in about 2015. He did in 2015, and he published that in the start of 2018, I think. So that was his journey from his MA thesis into a published monograph, which is now available in all good bookshops. Going then to the first semester, what you do in the first semester in the MA in Public History is you do two courses, one called an Intro to Public History and the second called Practicing Public History. And these two modules very much speak to each other. Practicing Public History is a practitioner's module. I'll go through it in detail in a minute, but just to give you the headlines on it, it shows students how to actually present history in different media. So it goes through exhibitions, podcasting, and other stuff I'll get onto in a minute. Intro to Public History then is the theory side of that. So on the one side, we do an hour of each 2-hour seminar in Intro to Public History on presenting history and how that can be presented. So the theory of how to write a press release, which Sabrina will tell you in a minute is very useful with her own career right to this day. So writing press releases, writing TV and film scripts, writing document analyses and things like that. And then in the second hour, because my intention with the graduates from the MA in Public History, and again, Sabrina, I'm going to lean on your example here, is a very good example of this. A lot of our graduates are geared towards going out into the private sector or the public sector, but outside of the academy. So in the second hour of that Intro to Public History, I go through an intensive study of historical methodology. So I'm teaching the historical method over multiple weeks. So theories and things like this, so that you're then equipped both to learn and to practice history in an authoritative way once you leave. Skipping down to the second semester in these two boxes down the bottom, Disseminating History has been explained already. That's the module where you actually organize a history conference and present that. And we had, in terms of adapted learning, we had a really interesting one this year where we presented it online as a webinar. And I think that was really brilliant as to how the students adapted to that challenge and how they brought that up. And then the other one there, HIS41240 Cultural Collections Internship. That's a new module that we've designed, or at least it's a revamp of a tried and tested module. So I'll explain that in a few minutes, but that's essentially working with the preeminent national collections we have in UCD and building more stuff for your portfolio. And the idea with the MA in Public History is that not only are you coming out of this with your dissertation, which is your trademark piece of work that's asserting your expertise in a particular field, but you're also coming out with portfolio pieces for your CV. So that includes a podcast, online publishing, document analysis, and an exhibition piece, which is done collaboratively. So just to run through these in detail, this is the practicing public history. As I said, that's the practitioner one. So after an introduction in week one, we go into podcasting, and we go from pre-production to delivery into pitching a podcast and then recording the podcast. And then you get detailed feedback on how that was done and essentially perfecting that particular skill. Then we go into designing an exhibition, which is taught in class for 2 weeks, but then you're actually left as the group to go off on your own and design that exhibition. In previous years, we've done that as panel exhibitions, pop-up banner exhibitions, online exhibitions, and most recently, we just designed a Google Arts exhibition, which is it's the new preeminent platform within Google for presenting arts and cultural output. So that's been done in collaboration with UCD Archives, and that'll be coming out later in the autumn. Then we organize a walking tour, which is a little bit different to your average walking tour. We go around the city centre and you as the students present on different monuments and sites and other things within Dublin City, which I've picked in advance, and they're not the standard things. I started out with the goal that there'd be nothing on 1916 or nothing that you'd see on an ordinary walking tour of Dublin within that. So we do the the maternity hospital in Holles Street, what will eventually become the National Maternity Hospital. We look at the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament Memorial in Merrion Square. We look at the Grand Canal as an artifact and look at that as environmental history. So these are, not your common or garden sites within Dublin. And by presenting on them, what I'm doing is I'm fitting you out for the early career part of your work, where you might want to try your hand at doing field trips and doing walking tours yourself. But it also teaches you something, I think, which is much deeper, which is presentation skills outside of the traditional environment. So whether you're standing up in front of a boardroom or you're going onto the radio or whatever else, the skills you get in doing presentations in the wild like that, I think will really stand to you. Then the final output of practicing public history is a From the Archives piece. And again, Lindsey has already alluded to these. The ones are published each year from the MA in Public History and put up online. So you can see them on HistoryHub.ie. And we go through an archival field trip, contextualization training, and then we actually go through writing and putting that in as one of your assessed pieces for that particular module. Then we go through actually talking about your dissertation. And that's just an enhanced dissertation workshop for the MA in Public History students, where they can talk about how their thesis is going to maybe interact with some of the themes of public history. In the intro to public history then, alongside the theory that we do each week with a detailed piece of historical methodology or theory work, ranging from postmodernism to gender to generational history to memory studies, we also go through radio and TV, agendas for public history, which is a really important evolving thing that we're doing in recent years around the History Manifesto and previous sort of manifestos and kind of agenda for histories. And we actually end up writing one of them, as you'll see in week 12. Then we go through primary source analysis, where I teach some elementary paleography, transcription, annotation, and contexts arising out of my own work as an editor previous to coming to UCD as a lecturer. Then we go through managing historical data, museums in the heritage sector, exhibitions. And whereas in the practicing public history one, exhibitions is about how to actually do this, the graphic design, and we bring in a graphic designer for that. In this one, we're actually talking about the theory of it and how that's done. Then we go into publication. So how do you actually publish a piece of history? And that's everything from journal publishing to book publishing, and situating you in the various seats around the table there, from author to editor to copy editor to publicist, and explaining the various different functions there. And then writing funding proposals, and crucially, because I think this comes in so many jobs nowadays, metrics, impact, and legacy. How do you actually measure your work? How do you design it so that it can have measurable impacts? And then how do you also build a legacy? Let's say you organize an event that's one day in the life. How do you actually make something permanent out of that? And that's something that as public historians, we've been working on quite a lot in recent years. Disseminating History, Lindsey has explained already, but that's an MA conference organized by the students, and that's one of your core outputs in the second half of the year in the spring. And then finally, the Cultural Collections Internship. So what we're doing here is it's a spotlight piece, and it's basically a piece of portfolio work that you do. So the spotlight is a 3,000 word analysis exploring a collection within either UCD Special Collections, UCD Archives, or the National Folklore Collection, which is housed within UCD. And as well as that 3,000 word analysis that you're writing on those collections to showcase it to a wider public, you're also going to write an 800 word blog piece, which will actually be published on UCD's Cultural Heritage Collections blog, which has a really huge monthly readership as well. The other part of this, and it took a lot of work, this is probably the biggest piece of work in developing this for the current realities we face in. The library staff and the archivists within those three collections came back to us when we said, okay, how can we actually get our students' work out there? And they said, well, why don't we let the students take over some of our social media platforms in order to roll out a social media strategy? So as part of this Cultural Collections Internship, you'll actually be designing an output which will roll out across Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, vlogs, and other social media channels, which will disseminate your research that you've done in this piece on your Cultural Collections Internship. So that's a huge thing for us this year, in terms of how we've kind of pivoted that internship towards something that can be done in person, but also as a contingency can be done at distance by giving digital access to the collections you'll actually be presenting. But what you're learning there is essentially the skills of presentation, the skills of running an entire communication strategy, and how to do that. The dissertation, as I said, is your big piece. This is essentially where you assert your skills as a researcher, and it's really important to us that that becomes a core aspect of the MA in Public History. That despite the fact that you're learning an otherwise non-traditional set of history skills for dissemination, you still do the tried and tested dissertation, which goes back centuries in terms of the academic tradition. So what I'd encourage all of you to do is start thinking about that now. And if you haven't got an idea for it, that's also fine, because when you come in September, then that's something you can start discussing with us as the directors of the program, and eventually with the supervisor. So to give you an example from this year, one of my students came to me and said, I really want to work in museums. I want to work particularly on cultural appropriation and stolen collections in museums. So we ended up pairing him with our new lecturer in Asian and Chinese history, Dr. Jennifer Bond, and he's working on the collections of the British Museum and how those were stolen from China. And that's become a big part of his research. So again, he didn't plan on writing it on the Chinese aspect or the British Museum when he came to UCD, but that then became a central pillar of it as he transitioned, and now he's really flying with that particular piece of research. Finally then, I'm going to hand over to, you're about to find out, her reputation will be asserted in a minute by her own skills and mastery of this, but Sabrina D'Angelo was a student of ours 2 years ago, so she's the class of 2018. And Sabrina came to the MA in Public History with, I suppose, several goals in mind. One of them was to develop her skills in Italian history, and she made leaps and bounds in the Italian language while she was studying on the program through the use of structured electives. Second of all, she wanted to work on modern Italian history, and she pivoted her dissertation, as she'll tell you about in a minute, in that direction. And thirdly, her passion, and we discussed this from a very early point, was working in public relations. So moving as someone who had studied a BA in history in UCD as an undergraduate to then go, how can I use the MA in Public History to pivot this towards my dream job in public relations? And rather than any spoilers, I'm going to hand over to Sabrina and let her tell you that particular story. If you have any questions for me, my email address is going to be circulated, and just get in contact. I'll be very happy to hear from you and answer any of your questions. So think about the MA in Public History, and if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.
Yeah, so I had started looking at public history because that marriage and that blending of theory and practice was really, really attractive to me. So when we went through the whole course and we learned how to do podcast, journalism, social media drafting, even touring, exhibition design, and communicating that history was integral to what I wanted to do and my later job experience. Yeah, so working on through the courses and that blending of, again, practice and theory, and then with the internship, the individuality that the internship was able to provide me. I did an internship specifically in public relations, working in the arts department of history, and having kind of that, the specific examples to reference to in my CV later on was really, really vital. And the way Conor is kind of shifting the internship to incorporate a portfolio is very, very, very important, because that was something I wish I had. And so I moved with the exhibition design and the media relations and drafting story and drafting press releases constantly during my internship. So when I actually started applying for jobs, I'm currently working at a public relations firm specializing in the cultural sector and the public research sector. So I work with the OPW, I work with the National Museum, I work with Screen Ireland a lot. Those are 3 main clients, but I also work in tech and the aviation sector and a lot of corporate clients. So that ability to draft and kind of retain information quickly and disseminate it in the way I want it was really vital throughout the different sectors that I work in. So I love my job because I am able to incorporate, again, the more techie, the more corporate side, but I am able to still work in what I want. And I want to reiterate Conor's importance of the research, because the practical skills that I learned during public history were brilliant. I kept citing the podcasts, I kept citing the press releases, working with HistoryHub, especially working with the exhibitions. But the main thing what I do is research. So I'm getting information constantly that I don't really know about, especially in the tech section, and I'm able to research and I'm able to communicate that in the way that it would be effective. And another thing that he was talking about, just with building an audience and knowing how to build an audience and knowing how to pitch and looking at the media and looking at the different types of media is really, really, really important to my job. And I got all of those skills from learning with the Irish media through public history. And again, your online focus with the social is going to be very important, because I'm drafting social calendars constantly with the OPW during lockdown. I redrafted their social media strategy. The National, sorry, not the National Gallery, the National Museum has an online exhibition currently. So quarantine for me specifically was how I was able to incorporate a lot of those skills that I learned in public history. Yeah, so I'm excited to hear your questions.
That's great, Sabrina. Thanks so much for giving that overview. And to Conor and Lindsey before you, I have a couple of questions, if I may. Can you just talk us through what it was like transitioning from being an undergrad to a graduate student in the School of History? What's that like? What are the differences, and how does life change for you within the school?
You develop a closer relationship with the lecturers, and that was something that struck me almost immediately, where the value of what you say changes, and it's more of a dialogue, which was really appreciative on my part, where I felt like I was talking with them rather than being talked at. You develop your own voice very, very quickly within the school, and it's small enough that you can do that, that you feel like a member of the staff.
That's very clear. That's incredible. And can I ask, on the whole point of transitioning, what was it like for you? You know, starting out, you've just graduated and looking for a job. How did you find that transition too?
So when I first started looking, I kind of continued, like with my internship that I started at UCD, I continued to do a little bit of work still within UCD. So that middle time was really, really vital, because I was still able to hone my skills even after graduating and passing in my dissertation. And then when I started actually applying for jobs, again, I had a portfolio to reference. I had legitimate experience that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And then when I found I was applying for jobs, even I got very lucky that I got a job in the cultural sector and heritage sites, but I was applying to jobs in tech, in medicine, comms, and all of that, and they were still really impressed with my background. So you're going to enter the job market with a very unique background that no one really has, because when you talk about how you communicate public history, but you also communicate stories and culture, that's something that you won't get by a basic comms degree or even a basic business degree. So I was competing against a lot of business students and a lot of comms students, but I was still able to stand out because of my background in the arts and just the way I present myself.
Fantastic. And can I ask, what's it like? So you're in Q4 PR, is that right? What's it like in the cut and thrust of the public relations industry? How are you finding that?
I started in an entry-level position. It's fast. I work in an agency, so you have two different options that you can choose. You can choose agency work or in-house. So I went from basically an in-house position to UCD into the head throes of agency work. I enjoy the speed, and I didn't think I would be able to have the opportunity to live in a work environment where it's constantly changing, where you constantly have a lot of things to do with a history degree. And yeah, no, it's my job, my particular agency is extremely flat. So I'm able to constantly talk to big time news correspondents and even the partners at my own firm. Like, it's very collaborative. It's a really, really nice work environment where I'm able to kind of engage my interests and they cater to my interests more than I expected in an entry role. So
that's great. And can I ask you, do you have any advice? So we're joined by an awful lot of people who are at that sort of intersection in their life. They've just completed their undergraduate, or they've been out to work and they're considering going back into take a master's in history. What would your advice be to them?
Stick with what you like. And I know that sounds really basic and you've probably heard it before, but genuinely, like, when I first graduated my history BA, I was looking at a lot of different BAs that I thought would stereotypically help me get a job. And I was able to go into an MA that initially didn't cater to specifically PR and specifically Italian history, but they organized it in a way that I was able to carve my own way through it. And that MA is so brilliant at working with you and working with individuals who know what they want and know what they want to do, and it works out in the end. So even though I graduated with a history MA in public history, I didn't expect to be working in the public sector right away, and I ended up doing that because I had this degree, and it is still impressive, and those jobs do exist. But you just have to think a little bit harder when you look for them.
That's great. Thank you, Sabrina. I have a question for you, Conor, about the, will there be online access to library books and archives for this course?
Oh yeah, okay, that's a great question, thanks. So I suppose to give you a sense of where we're at in terms of library access at the moment, in fact, I did not prepare this prop in advance, but I'm going to cover out my staff number. These are the packet of books that I got from UCD Library last week. I haven't gotten to that particular project yet, so they're still bound up. But one of the things that the library has done to adapt, and obviously with students back on campus, we're going to have a huge amount of on-campus stuff happening in September. But for those students who maybe can't get to the library to access, one of the things the library has done is they've made an online request system where you can request physical books that obviously can't be scanned and things like that. And that's done essentially like a click and collect, the same way you'd collect your shopping in the new weird world we're in. So I was able to order those books on a Tuesday afternoon, and on Wednesday morning I had the email in my inbox saying between 2 and 4 tomorrow, or that day, sorry, you can go in and collect your books. So for the physical resources in the library that we actually, you know, that aren't going to be scanned and those kind of things, like the 2 books I ordered, one was published in 1989, the other was published in 1966, so they're quite rare Irish history volumes. They were able to just magic them up. They were perfectly scanned. Whole system was actually fairly flawless, and we went the whole way through in that particular way, and that was great. The second thing is that we're actually expanding the digital collections we have in the library at the moment. So one of my PhD students at the moment is doing a comparative PhD between Liverpool and Dublin about local government and municipal politics. And in order to do that project, one of the things he needed was access to 19th century British newspapers. So several of us have been looking for this for quite some time, and that's now one of the new databases that we have in the library, and it's been a huge help in researching. So if you actually go onto UCD Library and go to the history resources section, I don't have the URL right now, you'll see the list of online databases that we've now signed up to, and that's an ever expanding list. So one of the things that I suppose we were looking at was what can students do, particularly at master's level, and not so much for you guys listening, the batch that are about to come in September of 2020, but for the people who are in the middle of their masters and then this hit. And what we were able to do was say, actually look at the amount that we've digitized through the UCD Digital Library, through UCD Archives digital collections. There's a huge tract of the Mulcahy papers, which just got funding for digitization, and that should be largely completed by the end of the summer. They're one of the really key collections alongside the De Valera papers on the history of the Irish Revolution, and that's going to be a huge leap forward. So archivally, in terms of journal articles that you're already familiar with, and then in terms of digital collections, including newspaper collections and all these kind of things, the subscription services that the UCD Library have gone and sought out and paid for on your behalf are a complete trove. So I think there's a really interesting shift that's happening now in history because of this current crisis. There was a huge wave of digitization going back to when I was a postgraduate student in the early 2000s. And I remember things like Hansard House of Commons debates going online in 2005. And that was a massive leap forward for us. But people actually haven't had the time to go through those online resources because they've still been doing the traditional work of historians, going into the archives and finding things for themselves. So I think you're actually standing on the cusp of a new era where we go back and we start to really delve into the things that have been assiduously digitized in the past 15 years and learning how to use those afresh. And Sabrina actually reminded me of something when she was talking about marketing your skills as a historian or a public historian out there, that the founder of public history, Robert Kelly in UCLA over in California, said, history doesn't have a jobs crisis, it just has a communications crisis or an identity crisis. And he says, rather than talking about yourself as a historian, think about yourself as an information specialist. Your skills are the skills of research, they're the skills of condensing absolute, huge, vast tracts of material into something that's manageable, interpretable by different audiences. So that's the skill set that we develop. And think about, even now at your stage of finishing out a BA, about how you're an information specialist, whether you come and do a master's or not. That's the secondary skill that you learn through the historical method, in the same way that people talk about the scientific method and how valued that is in business. The historic method is also incredibly important. And I think those kind of soft skills that we learn, that we don't necessarily, have a cert of paper to say, I'm brilliant at reading 50 books and being able to synthesize those down. But that's actually the kind of soft skill that businesses are increasingly realize they need. Google and people like that are turning around and say, we don't need any more software engineers, we actually have plenty of them. What we need is someone with the skills to interpret that data and tell us what we have. And that's what we train people, particularly at the MA in history, to do.
I mentioned my dissertation basically at every interview I went to, even though it had nothing to do with what I was applying for at all. But I marketed myself as a storyteller and as an expert researcher. And that's kind of the core of what I actually do. It's constantly gathering information to write those press releases, to write the social calendar. But don't sell yourself short with those skills. Talk about your dissertation, it's going to be your life.
Love it.
Yeah, and just as if I can just finish off and say that it's never been more obvious to me the sort of skills that you will graduate with when you look at the current protests on Black Lives Matter and the issue of statues and the way in which our history is presented but also shapes our present. And one thing I've been really struck by many media commentators is their complete inability to understand the context and the broader information of what's happening, and therefore they don't get why statues mean what they mean to people.
My clients are coming to me with that. I'm working with a client who's kind of in the process of preparing a public art exhibition, and with sculpture and statue and the way we're actively communicating in our history being in the news, and they know my background, that's something that they're coming to me with. I just led a meeting a couple of weeks ago about sculpture and public art and history in Ireland. So it's completely relevant.
I mean, it's really living history. Yeah.
Well, that's a great note to go out on, living history. Thank you all so much for your time, and especially to Sabrina D'Angelo for joining us. Really appreciate you coming in from your busy meeting of social calendars and sculptures. So thank you very much for joining us. And to Conor and Lindsey Earner-Byrne, thank you very, very much. But that is not the end. This is just part one. So coming up next is William Mulligan, who is joining us to speak about the MA in European History and the MA in International War Studies. And that'll be followed by the MA in Global History. So we're moving away a little bit from Ireland, beyond these shores to the global stage. And this particular webinar focuses on the MA in European History and also the MA in International War Studies. I would like to introduce you to Professor William Mulligan, who's going to be telling you about these two courses. And then we will be joined by Mairead Barrett, who is currently just finalizing her thesis in European history. So she'll give you some insights into what it's like to study the MA in European history and also her experiences across Europe and what that has been like, and a little bit about her story and where she's going. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to William Mulligan. William, thank you.
Great. Emer, thanks very much for the introduction, and thanks to you all for logging in and attending this webinar about two of our international programs over the next war studies. And this is for European history. What I want to start off by is talking about the structure of the program. And what I'll do is I'll take a typical student. For the purposes of this presentation, we will call this student William. And we'll say that William wants to study European history. He's attracted by the bright lights of European cities and the chance to embrace European culture. So it's a 2-year program that takes place over 4 semesters. William will start off in his first semester at UCD, which will be his home university. And then William will go and study at least one of the other partner universities, which I'll come on to in the next slide, but usually 2 of the partner universities. So in December 2020, William will finish his first semester at UCD, and then he'll leave these shores and go elsewhere. And then he'll return to Dublin in January or February 2022, when he'll devote his attention without fail to writing up his dissertation on a topic of European history. So it's a 2-year program over 4 semesters. Now, William's a lucky chap, and he's got the opportunity to study at some of these great universities in Europe. The principal partnerships that UCD has developed are with the Humboldt in Berlin, the University of Vienna, 2 universities in Rome, so he's spoiled for choice if he goes to Rome, Rome III and Rome Tor Vergata, Paris Diderot, and then the program is developing, so there's other opportunities to study at associated members in Madrid, Belgrade, Tallinn, Lisbon, and I was on a call this morning, and I think other partners will be joining over the forthcoming year or 2, including Oslo, for instance. So plenty of choice for students for William as he pursues his European history degree. So why might William be attracted to this course? Well, he's always wanted to study abroad. He picked up a smattering of French perhaps in school and wants to work on his language capabilities. So I think, as everyone agrees, it's easier to learn a language in situ than to learn it from a book or YouTube or any other way at home. And while William loves the range of courses that are available at UCD, he also wants to take courses that simply are beyond the capacity of any single university to offer. So courses in medieval history, in Italian history, Spanish history, a whole range of options are available at these partner universities. And I think it's also interesting to think not just the subjects that we study in European history, but now we're 2 decades into the 21st century, what does it mean to practice European history, the possibilities that we have to travel, to study with people from other countries, to engage with other academic intellectual cultures. And that's a real key benefit of this program. In addition, if I was advising William, I would say that the 2-year MA program is excellent preparation for PhD programs. Recent graduates have won full scholarships to the European University Institute at Florence, and more recently a full scholarship to Oxford, and they've also very competitive for scholarships at UCD if someone wishes to stay on and study at European history in Dublin. But William's opportunities won't just be limited to PhDs, to a life of slogging it in academia. He might also look forward to work in, as other recent graduates have, in public administration, in NGOs. For instance, one recent graduate has taken up a position working on climate change security and in think tanks. And in his free time, long after he's completed this course, he'll have an opportunity to enjoy those networks of friends in cool cities around Europe, to go back to Neukölln, to go back to the Marais in Paris, other hotspots that he might have enjoyed on this 2-year program. So that's the kind of the basic structure and key benefits and features of the 2-year program, the MA in European History.
Mairead, who's joining us from Ballinasloe, County Galway, you're very welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, and in particular for taking time out during this busy thesis writing stage of your MA.
Exactly. I couldn't pass up the opportunity to rave about this master, so it's all good.
So can I ask you, so you did a BA in German and history, and then how did you, what made you decide to go for the MA in European history?
From the moment I finished my BA, I knew I wanted to stay in education, in third level education, and I was looking at history as my main goal. And I was thinking, how could I both combine my love of the German language and of language in general and of history? And this master's just popped straight out at me. From the moment I saw it and I read as what Dr. Mulligan has already proven and shown, all the benefits and for the future and for the experience itself, I knew this is the area, or this is the program that I wanted to do to help develop what I had already achieved in my BA and just make it a little bit stronger.
Fantastic. So you're one of these people that William spoke about that has all these cool friends all around Europe.
Exactly, and I'm absolutely delighted. As I say, you never have to look for a hotel bed or anything. Anywhere you go, you've got somewhere to stay, which is brilliant. So that's definitely a plus from the program. Whether it's students in the own program itself, the MA itself, or in students who are doing other programs, it's amazing to see what their developments, their own individual projects, their thesis, and then leaving the academic side, just being able to meet other people and explore the cities with them and everything like that. It's been brilliant.
So talk us through your journey. You started in Dublin, like William outlined, and you finished up in Dublin, albeit now Ballinasloe with the COVID lockdown. What happened to you? What cities did you choose to study in, and which universities did you go to? So can you talk us through what that was like?
Exactly, no problem. For my second and third semesters, my second I started off right after Dublin. I went to Berlin and studied in Humboldt University, and then for my third semester I went to Rome and I studied in Roma Tre. So back to Berlin, let's say. So with Berlin, I had the German language starting off, so that was great. So this master's offered an opportunity for me just to develop on this and everything like this. And Berlin was amazing. I was actually fortunate enough to be already have already an experience, an Erasmus experience from my BA, which I was in Munich. So this time two completely different geographical places I could experience. So Berlin was amazing, and Humboldt was great. And then with Rome, I went directly straight from Berlin, which was a lovely little culture shock, but I enjoyed it very much. And there I had no Italian, nothing like that. So I was able to have the opportunity to learn some Italian and improve from just saying ciao and bella. So it was great just to learn some. Love it. And now I can combine the two and more. So it's brilliant. And Roma Tre was amazing as well. And like that, like what Dr. Mulligan said, I was fortunate to be able to get a smattering of other courses linked with history, such as political science and things like this. So that really opened a lot more opportunities. So it was brilliant.
That's fantastic. And do you mind me asking, Mairead, when you were studying in Berlin, given that you'd done your Erasmus in Munich and you'd studied German as part of your BA, were you taking classes in German language? Was that optional, or was it mandatory, or how does that work?
Yeah, for history-wise, I was taking English classes, but there were German classes available. And then you could also, on the flip side, do a German language course, intensive courses, work with the level you already have, or you could do beginner. They were not mandatory, but you could do them no problem. And then the same thing with Rome. It was not mandatory to do the Italian language, but they were offering free classes. So your first class, let's say, was free. So I couldn't pass up the opportunity. But like that, I studied in English because of not having enough Italian. So it was great.
God, it sounds like some experience, my goodness. And can I ask, what have you decided after all of that? What did you decide to do your thesis on?
So my thesis, the area I focused on was economic history. And so at the moment I'm writing about the sensitivity of financial markets in relation to war scares from about 1875 to 1914. And this area, it was experienced while, particularly in Rome. It was an area that I got more experience in, and kind of my interest developed from there, and I decided to work on my thesis on that then when I came home. So
fantastic. And can I ask, I know you're deep in the middle of finalizing your thesis. Have you thought about what you'd like to do after, or are you going to wait until you finish your thesis to decide what comes next?
Unfortunately, with COVID, it gave me some lovely time to think and mull over what to do. So I used that time kind of wisely, I hope. So I'm kind of thinking, hopefully next year to develop a PhD thesis. So I would like to continue on the academic trail, especially in European in economic and European history. So that's kind of the direction I'm hoping to go on. And this master's, as Dr. Mulligan said, was a brilliant way of developing the skills needed and also the interest needed in a particular area that I would, for me personally, like to explore more to be able to do a PhD. So it was amazing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. We might wait for a few more questions to come in, and if you want, William, we could move on to international war studies.
Sure.
Well, UCD has the best history department in Ireland, and we cover pretty much any geographical area. You can study Australian history, you can study American history, you can study Asian history.
One of the wonderful things about UCD is the internationalization of its campus in recent years. We now have students from all over the world.
Well, as someone who came to Dublin as an outsider, one of the things that struck me is that it is a very vibrant European capital city with a really rich cultural history. Dublin was, of course, home to some of the most famous writers of the 20th century, and you still see that in archives, in the literary culture.
Our approach is to combine the strength of Dublin and of Potsdam. So it's 1 year in Potsdam, 1 year in Dublin, and writing the master thesis in Dublin. So it's an international degree, taught in English with international students, and this is really unique in the world.
I think the positive aspects of the history master's programs here at UCD, students have the opportunity to have a direct relationship with their professors, and they are encouraged to discuss topics rather than repeating notions. It's a very interactive way of studying.
Berlin and Dublin are both young, diverse and culturally exciting cities with an awful lot going on. There are many cultural institutions, events, festivals, talks, and not to mention a fun nightlife in both places. It's a really great place to live and to study and explore.
One of the focus of Potsdam is the history of war in the 20th century. So the Second World War, the First World War, but also new wars in the 1990s. I'm a historian, but we also have lecturers coming from sociology, from political science. We have outside lecturers offering courses on cyber war, on war and conflict in Latin America. So it's a huge variety.
Students have the opportunity to take a wide range of courses across global history. They can take topics on American history, Australian history, but obviously we have a concentration of expertise on European history.
Potsdam is in the southwest outskirts of Berlin. It's just 25 minutes by overground. It's very easy, accessible. I think we are quite successful in bringing our students into jobs on an international scope. We offer a huge variety of internships. We have our graduates going to think tanks in Germany and abroad. They go to the media, to television or to newspapers, joining intelligence services or even NGOs.
Our students come from a wide background. They apply from different countries, have a background sometimes in history, sometimes in politics or related fields. We reach for this global audience and we want to give them the foundation for a career in international organizations or in the countries where they come from.
Gives a real flavour for the internationality of the course and also the types of people that study on the course and the types of academics that students will get to meet with and work with. So over to you again, William.
Yeah, I just want to talk you through the structure of the course. This is a 2-year program like the European History MA program. It's 4 semesters, but in this program you start off in Potsdam. So you spend the whole of the first year, 2 semesters at Potsdam, and then you spend the whole of the second year at UCD. Each semester you take 30 credits, so essentially 3 courses per semester. And then in the final semester, you dedicate yourself to writing up your dissertation. So we've had students who've just completed on a range of topics in 19th and 20th century, and indeed early 21st century warfare. So there's people right on topics as recent as the Iraq War, the War on Terror. And students in this program have an option to complete in early May, which means they would graduate by mid-June, or they can complete in late July, which means they graduate in September. So we can be flexible about that. Why this particular partnership? The University of Potsdam is the leading center for military history in Germany. And the chair is Professor Sönke Neitzel, who you'll have seen in the video there. He's the leading professor of military history in Germany. I've known him since 2004 when we met in Glasgow, and my colleague Robert Gervart has known him for over a decade. So we have an excellent working relationship with him. Potsdam, as Sönke said, is close to Berlin. And if you prefer to live in Berlin, as indeed Professor Neitzel does, you can live there and commute to Potsdam. It takes about 40 minutes. So it's really the same distance as living in Howth and commuting into Dublin, or living in Dun Laoghaire. The train even looks like the Dart. It's the same, the S-Bahn is the same kind of size. UCD also has blowing my own trumpet too much, world leading center in war studies, and I'd say we've got a particularly strong focus on the history of warfare in the 19th and 20th century, with experts in the First and Second World Wars, imperial conflicts, the Cold War and wars of decolonization. And both universities are close to important archival collections. Those you've may already have experienced, there's a lot of digitized material that's also available that you can use for your research. And what are the some key features and benefits? All the courses are taught through English, but when you're in Potsdam, if you have German, you can certainly take courses in German, or you can take a German language course. I'd also say there's a really excellent group dynamic. In fact, my last night out in Dublin before the lockdown was in Toner's Pub with the war studies students who are due to come to Dublin in September. So they flew over to kind of have a, just to get to know Dublin, to have a night out there, to get to know the staff, and they're a great bunch of students who've taken classes together. Really good atmosphere. It's a very international group of students. One of them is currently in lockdown in South Korea, which is probably one of the safer places in the world to be in lockdown. Others are in the United States, in various parts of Germany, in other parts of Europe. And I think international mobility is attractive to employers. The fact that a student has the get up and go to spend time in another country, to live in another culture, to experience those challenges, says something to employers that they enjoy or that they value. The first year of the program is completing this summer, so I've just been supervising dissertations that are now wrapping up. Some of those students are applying for PhDs, but as you'll have heard in the video, others are looking for roles and jobs in media, public administration, think tanks and international relations, and they've already secured internships and posts that will start over the summer or in the autumn. Great, well I'll leave it there and I'll open it for questions, I guess.
I want advice from both of you. So I might go to you first, Mairead. What is your advice to students who are sitting where you sat a couple of years ago? What advice would you give to them now? And they're considering doing this MA. What sort of things would you be telling yourself now, knowing what you know?
Knowing what I know is great. Great way to put it. What I would say, God, where would I start? I would say, definitely one of the things I suppose is to not, I know it's perhaps maybe easier to say now, but not to panic too much about thinking ahead, to, okay, I need, next semester I'm gone, this semester I'm here, or, how will life be like, all the things I have to organize. It's very easy to get caught up on all that and to drown out all the perhaps the more things you can prepare for, the good opportunities that might come your way. So I suppose the thing there I would say is don't be afraid to speak to the School of History, for example, in the MA European History case, Dr. William Mulligan, don't be afraid to come and speak about worries, whether they be questions about the courses themselves or financial, etc., etc. Don't be afraid to approach anyone in that regard. And then I would then, moving to a different country, of course, is daunting if you have never done it before, and especially then perhaps not having a language that even for me, already being in Berlin, that was daunting for me in Rome, for example. But there, it was great. For example, the students who were in the European History Masters in Rome, they had already completed their Erasmus in Dublin 2 semesters beforehand. So I knew them. It was great to have people to look after me, that kind of a way, help me settle in, little bureaucracy things like these that perhaps you need a little heads up. Things like that was great. So yeah, perhaps just to not panic, but don't be afraid to ask for help either. Things will sort out.
What wonderful advice. Thank you very much. And now if I can go to you, William, what advice would you give me? I want to do both these courses. How do I pick one from the other? What's your recommendation in terms of figuring out which one is for me?
Sure. Well, you know, just to go back to one thing Mairead said, and one thing I experienced myself, I had the good fortune to spend a year in Erasmus, and I remember before I went, I had this pit of nerves in my stomach, and I ended up having a wonderful year, still in regular contact with people from it. So one way of thinking about these MA programs in particular, but any MA program, is that it's not just an intellectual experience, it's also a social experience. It's also a moment for personal development. And I think that the opportunity to live abroad, to study abroad in that sense really does help people develop. I learned a lot about myself, and I think students do when you're put in those situations. So enjoy it, as Mairead said. In terms of making the choice, I think I would bracket them in two different ways. So I'd say if you're more interested in international politics, international history, military conflict, really strategic studies, then the International War Studies program is the one for you. And it has a much more modern focus, 19th and 20th century. If you're interested in European social history, history of political thought, medieval history, modern history, then I'd say the European History MA is the one for you. That's the way I'd break them. That's, I suppose, the big distinction I would see between them. Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you both very much. Thank you especially to Mairead for coming down to us from Ballinasloe. Really appreciate it. No, and thank you for being so generous with your time. I see there's just one final question coming in here. Is there any talk on whether the first year of the MA International War Studies course in the new University of Potsdam could be moved online? William, I wonder, could you take that question just before we close out this session? Yeah, it's still too early to say. So one thing about the German academic year is the German academic year runs on a different calendar to ours. It starts in November. So the first semester in German universities start in early November and they finish in late February. And the second semester runs from normally April to July. So by November, there's hope that the pandemic will be under control. But if it's not, then there's a possibility that the course will be run online. And we'll certainly keep applicants up to date with information about that. But I would say at the moment, Germany has managed this pandemic relatively well, and is more open than even we are at the moment. Okay, that's great. So like I said as well at the beginning of this session, just to add to that, we will be in touch with all applicants in due course when we have answers to these questions. But in the interim, please do keep in touch with us. You can contact William Mulligan directly, william.mulligan@ucd.ie, and keep in touch with us. Let us know what your questions are as we move through time, and we will confirm the details of what the next semester looks like in due course. So thanks all very much for joining us. We're going to move on to the final installment from the School of History, which is the MA in Global History. The plan for those of you who are here is William, first of all, will give you an overview of the MA in Global Studies, and then we're going to bring in Fisayo, who will talk to you a little bit about her experience of global studies at UCD. So William, I think we're safe to move. It looks like everybody is here, so I'm going to hand over to you. What I wanted to do was to say a few words to run through the structure of the MA in Global History. This is a new program here in the School of History, and it builds on recent developments that we've made as a school by appointing scholars who can really speak about history beyond North America and Ireland and Europe. So the structure of the program, this is a one-year program. It runs over 3 semesters and it's 90 credits. As part of this program, you take a 10-credit core module methods in global history. That's taught by Dr. Hussein Omar, who's a specialist in the history of the Middle East, but more broadly of empire and of global history in the late 19th and 20th centuries. In the second semester, all students in this program, as with some of the other history programs, one-year history programs in the school, take a 10-credit conference module. This is where all the students come together and they basically organize your own conference. And that means you've got an opportunity to talk to students taking Irish history, medieval history, public history, and that's great fun. This year the conference went, because it couldn't take place physically on campus, it took place online on Zoom over an afternoon. We all finished up with a cup of tea and a drink and a slice of cake at the end. Now, as well as taking those two essentially core modules, you've got an opportunity to take other modules, such as on the history of global revolutions, history of the relationship between commerce and war, history of race in North America, and the history of British Empire. So it's, as well as Irish history modules that might speak to a global history theme. So there's a wide range of choices that you have. And then you finish up by writing a 50-credit dissertation module on a topic of your choice, and under the close supervision of a member of staff. This should all be done, completed by the last working day in July, and then we can all relax and chill out in August. So what would I say are some of the key features of global history at UCD? One is to say we've really expanded our coverage of global history in recent years. So we now can offer courses on history of the Middle East, East Asia, Central Asia, North American history, and British imperial history. We've also developed, I think, a very strong research profile in global history. So we've got major projects in the history of, in global history, such as Mark Jones's project on the Second Age of Global Revolutions, in which he looks at how a series of revolutions between the 1890s and the 1920s, spanning not just the well-known revolutions of Ireland, Russia, but also those of Mexico, China, Cuba, and elsewhere, how these transformed world history in this period. One thing that I think distinguishes our global history from other universities is we've got a very intense focus on the period from the mid-19th century to the late 20th century. So that would mean, I would say, that if you're passionate about 18th century history, 18th century global history, that we're probably not the course to take. But I think if you're passionate about global history from the mid-19th to the late 20th century, then we do offer a very good program. And I think my colleagues in Irish and European history, we think about Irish and European history within a global context. Scholars working on 1916 are very aware of all the other things that were happening around the globe in 1916. And this both enriches global history by having that distinctive Irish perspective, but also enriches Irish history by having a global perspective. So I think they reinforce each other. We've also, and I think the courses and dissertation topics reflect these strengths. So again, what kind of career and further research opportunities are there? There's certainly some of our alumni and recent graduates in the field of global history have gone into a PhD program. Sorry, I should preface that by saying this year is the first year we've had the global history program, but we have, of course, had graduates who've worked on global history themes before. They've gone into PhD programs. Recent student of mine has got, in fact, two recent students from UCD have got jobs in foreign affairs, others in business. recently had a request from a former student for a reference for an accountancy firm, and was recently in touch with another student, an English student who came to UCD and has now returned to London and is working in public affairs and PR. He had the interesting experience of working with the Lib Dems and then decided to depart that political party to get a job elsewhere and is working in PR. So our students have gone into a wide range of or have found a wide range of opportunities as a result of this degree, both in terms of further research and in terms of employment. Okay, I'll leave it there, Emer, and pass the floor back to you.
So thank you very much. That's a really good overview of the course and the benefits and the range of careers that you can embrace. So that's great to see. I thought we might bring in Fisayo now. Fisayo, how are you doing? Fisayo joined the School of History from UCD Law. She did her undergraduate in law in UCD and then moved over to the School of History, which I think is just a really interesting trajectory. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please, Fisayo?
Yeah, so I actually did my undergrad in Sutherland and I was a BBL student, so double majors, business and law. It was intense. And I was considering very seriously whether to do the FE1s or the King's Inns right before I graduated. And in my last year and final semester as a law student, I had the opportunity to do a research module with a professor who I've kept in touch with. He's excellent, Kevin Costello. And it ended up being a legal history project on the operation of Vice Admiralty courts operating out of Freetown and in other colonial sites for the suppression of the slave trade in the early 1800s. And it just kind of like opened my mind to the possibility of doing something not necessarily professional, like legal profession related. And I decided to take the plunge and apply to the School of History. And as William said, we didn't have the Global History Masters at the time. I actually didn't even apply to the Masters at first because I was coming in across from a completely different discipline. I actually went into the graduate diploma first for a semester and worked with some professors at that level before I step-stoned into the Master's program in the later semesters. And it was just an excellent experience. I really had a great time. And coming in from another discipline really showed me that it was possible to synthesize academic interests in different areas. You might think that, oh, what does law have to do with the history of slave trade? And it's actually quite important. Law really is just history with a fancy wig in Ireland and the UK sometimes. So it was a really, really good experience for me to speak to people who actually encouraged me to look outside of going for a law master's or going for a professional law degree and deciding to do something academic in a completely different discipline.
Fantastic. And so you've completed your master's now and went on to work in Lidl for a short while. What was that like, that transition, that pivot from academia and from the School of History into the Lidl purchasing department? Can you tell us just a little bit about what that was like?
Very different, because I should confess that it was actually on the very last day of classes that I was offered my job in Lidl. So I was working full time while writing my dissertation. It was a hectic experience. If you can avoid it, please do. But it also does teach some really, you're forced to learn time management. And coming from a completely academic program and immersing myself into the world of food retail, it really creates, it really forces you to look at what you have picked up in the last year that you've been in school and apply it to like a real adult like working environment. So some of the like organizational skills and as I said, time management, you really do have to import, and my emails are always excellently written because I was used to writing in academic context. So it was definitely interesting. Not to say it was easy, but it was worthwhile. I think it's been worthwhile to remove myself from academia purely for a little while, just to enter back in and see the difference. I think it's caused my perspectives to really change in certain ways.
That's great. And I believe you had some very good news recently that is going to lead you into new pastures. Can you tell us a little bit about this wonderful news?
So I applied last year to the PhD in history program with Yale University, and I got the great news this year that I have been accepted into the program. So I will be, fingers crossed, hopefully moving across to the US, to Connecticut in a number of months and beginning the PhD program there. I'll be working with some really, really highly esteemed names in the field, like Lauren Benton and Arnie Vestad, and it's just a very exciting opportunity.
That's fantastic news. So you're coming back to history, is that right?
Yes, yes, I will be very much firmly in the School of History, but again, drawing on interdisciplinary roots and backgrounds. So I will also actually be touching base with people in the Yale Law School, and particularly specialists in the School of History who also have legal backgrounds, of which there are quite a few in somewhere like Yale. So it's very, very exciting.
That is fantastic news, and our congratulations again.
Thank
Can I ask you, would you have any advice for people who are sitting, you know, where you sat a few years ago? What advice would you give them in terms of pursuing global history?
Definitely don't be afraid to bring your interests to bear. The reason I accidentally stumbled into history in the first place while I was in the law school was a series of very random Googles while discussing with a friend some of the history of Nigeria and its interaction with Britain as a colony at the time. And it led me to just completely new pastures of like intellectual thought that I wouldn't necessarily have considered if I was only strictly looking at things that concerned me academically. So never be afraid to bring up your personal interests in your academic research. Like if you're vaguely interested in the history of animation, you never know where that might lead, or comic books or video games. It could be anything. I was researching sailors, I think, and that's how I found out about this. So please, by all means, definitely bring your interest to bear. There's no point in researching something for 6 months that doesn't really excite you intellectually or stimulate you in any way. If you have an interest in it, you're better off dedicating your time to something that you really, really want to investigate. And another piece of advice I would have is bring those interests to your teachers, to your professors. I have had a really wonderful experience with faculty members in the School of Law and in the School of History, just from having random conversations about things I've read or authors I've encountered, ideas I came across in different pieces of, in different materials. Don't be afraid to send an email. Part of what sold me on applying to the School of History, to the master's program, is actually an email that I sent to William months before I actually applied, asking him, oh, I saw that you do this thing called Murder in the South Seas. What's that about? And he sent me the syllabus, and it turned out to be just fascinating and fantastic, and we ended up doing it together. And I'm glad to say I performed very well in the module. But he was also an excellent teacher, and he did indulge my interest. Like, don't be afraid to send an email, a polite email, of course, asking for an explanation of something, or if a professor or a teacher or lecturer would have time to meet you or discuss over Zoom, over a 15-minute Zoom call, as we do now, something that you would like to read more about. And they'll always recommend you, they'll point you in the right directions, authors to read, books to look into, that kind of thing. So those would be my two big pieces of advice.
That's great. Thank you very much, Fisayo. And William, what about you? What advice do you have for students who are considering this MA?
Yeah, just, well, partly to echo what Fisayo has already said, is that, you know, to do a topic that you're passionate about. I remember a colleague, Stuart Ward, who was a visiting Australian professor at UCD many years ago, saying, you know, good history is like a good novel. It needs to have something of the person who's writing it in it. That's what gives it its edge, its impetus, its novelty. About this program, I'd also say that global history is an area that's generating more and more interest. that's an academic level for various reasons, because we no longer believe that we live in isolated nation states that are able to be hermetically sealed off, or at least we didn't until about 3 months ago. But even in these hermetically sealed days, we see how difficult it is to live in isolation. Imported foods, workers who come in and out, continued transportation links. We don't live in a world of nation states. We live in this globalized world, and so we need to think about the world we live in through this lens. And I also think that in terms of global history, it's something about thinking about intercultural awareness, that this is something that's valuable in any walk of life. Sometimes we learn it by hook and crook, by being in a different country, by speaking to someone from a different background, and learning about different cultures. But taking a program in global history can make us, I think, more sensitive to the varieties of experiences that have made the world what it is today. And I think that's an important skill, both as a citizen, as an academic, and perhaps as a professional, whatever profession you go into, because it's likely that you won't just encounter people from Ireland for the rest of your lives.
No, that's true. And can I ask, I have a question just from an earlier session about the European history, if that's okay, just to move topics slightly, from an attendee who's still with us. Is the dissertation in European history undertaken under supervision of UCD supervisors or supervisors from the other universities?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's actually in this program, you've got two supervisors. The principal supervisor will be at UCD. And then when you go to the other universities, or at least one of the other universities, you're asked to contact someone who can act as a second supervisor and give advice on a particular topic. So that means you get feedback from two different people. Now, your principal supervisor will remain in UCD, but you will have a secondary supervisor. And often that can be very productive because given the wealth of knowledge across these different universities, you can really pick up a different angle for your research.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Thanks to you both. I think that gives a really good overview of global history, and indeed the other histories we've discussed today, the other master's possibilities have given great overview to the opportunities that exist within the School of History. So unless you have any thoughts, I see here one question just in. Would a thesis in political violence be appropriate to the International War Studies course? In from Lucas.
Yeah, it would. So my colleague, Robert Gervart, Professor Robert Gervart, he runs a course on the MA program in political violence. As it turns out, he's on research leave next year, but he will be back in 2021, 2022, when you would be writing the dissertation. And his course includes issues that go up as far as terrorism in the early 21st century. So it's possible to write a dissertation on that kind of topic.
Okay, great. Well, I think we've answered all the questions. So thanks to everyone who's joined us from home, wherever you are. And like I said earlier, please do stay in touch with the School of History and with the course directors. We're here to answer your questions, so let us know how we can help you. And thank you for joining us. So that's the end of the webinars, this time around anyway, for the School of History. So thank you all very much, and bye-bye.